Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 1 of the Becoming a Gentleman podcast. My name is Christopher Linkenbach and I will be your host today. Today's episode is going to be entitled, What is the Gentleman? We're going to be diving into and breaking down the archetype of the gentleman and what it means to be a gentleman in today's modern age. I want to start us off with a quick quotation. This is absolutely one of my favorite quotes. It is so simple and is also by a man who I very greatly respect, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He says in this quote, "A man is what he thinks about all day long." And to me, that quote is very powerful because it basically signifies that whatever is happening inside of our mind is what is creating our reality. And that is kind of the premise of what I believe the gentleman archetype has found out about the world and the universe around him, is that first and foremost, he's curious about the existence of nature and how things operate. And he's also a game changer in a sense. He is willing to question the presupposed rules that society has passed on to him. He's willing to question if his cultural upbringings were correct. He's willing to question if the beliefs instilled by him, by his teachers and his parents and other members of authority, religious leaders, are actually true and correct. And he's willing to start diving into his own psyche and understand what his intuition is telling him, as opposed to constantly seeking some sort of external validation or external advice about reality and what he believes to be true about reality. And so I think a good place to start off this discussion is trying to define what the gentleman archetype is. And as this podcast progresses, I think that this definition will change over time, as it should, I don't think that there should be a specific mold, because ultimately what we are playing with here are the energies of masculinity and femininity. And these are energies that they do shift over time, and they do change roles, and they aren't necessarily stuck and rigid. And even though there might be some fundamental truths about masculinity as an energy form and femininity as an energy form, there exists within both of them the continuity of change, right? Because we have different levels of reality. We have the energetic levels of masculine and feminine, but then we also have the molecular and the biological, and ultimately all the way up into our thinking conscious in the societal structures that we've placed upon masculinity and femininity. And part of what I would like to discover and discuss and to ask and to ponder is, what are these fundamental truths of masculinity? What are these fundamental truths of the divine feminine? And how do we incorporate these two energies into our lives? And how much of what we have created is a societal construct? How much of who we are and our identity is completely thought form? And how much of it is predicated on our DNA and our biology? And I don't have answers to these questions. I definitely have some formulated opinions, but I'm not necessarily rigid and stuck in my opinions in any way. And I'm open to critique, and I'm open to challenge on my beliefs and my opinions, because I truly want to understand what it means to be a gentleman in today's world. And that is a good segue into defining gentleness. What does it mean to be a gentleman? Well, if we break down where gentleman came from, it actually started from a French word, gentilhomme, which basically was a word to signify nobility, right? It was a word that signified French nobility, their blood. You were born into nobility. There was a separate class structure until the French Revolution in 1789. And what that meant was essentially, this was a term that was used for a separation of class, a gentle man. This wasn't necessarily a tuxedo wearing, cigar smoking, whiskey drinking, high class individual. This was literally this was a word that was used to create a representation, a concept of a class structure, right? But we've sort of seen this word shift over time, and essentially what this has come into is it has turned into an English word, gentleman. And in the English dictionary, there are a couple definitions for the word gentleman. And so the first and foremost, I just pulled these straight off of Google, is a chivalrous, courteous, or honorable man. right? And so I think that that is kind of a pretty broad understanding of what our society would agree upon as a gentleman. But the second definition that Google gave me is something that kind of gives me a little bit of a segue to talk about, which is the definition is a polite or formal way of returning, the polite or formal way of referring to a man. And something that I want to get across very clear is that something that I believe and I understand is that anyone can be a man, right? There is a quote that basically says, becoming a boy is a matter of chance, becoming a man is a matter of age, and becoming a gentleman is a matter of choice, right? And so what that basically means is that you can be born as into a body of a boy. You can grow up, and by the time you turn 18, you are legally a man. Now, whether or not you embody the characteristics of manhood is a different question, but becoming a gentleman and holding the space of what it means to have that gentleman archetype that is 100% a choice. And a way I like to look at gentleness is really by separating the two words that we have. So when you look at the etymology of the word gentleman, the breakdown of the word, we have gentle and man. And yes, this was originally a structure to create a class nobility sort of hierarchy. Now what we have is a pronunciation of the word gentle and man. And when I think of that, when I hear the word gentleman, I don't like assuming that it's just a word that should be rolled over, gentleman. I think that if we separate the space, or if we over pronunciate the gentle man, we get the true essence of what it means to embody that of being a gentle man. A few examples of gentlemen throughout history, in my opinion: first and foremost, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha; Jesus Christ of Nazareth; Rumi. These are all individuals who I believe have embodied characteristics of what it means to be a gentleman. And I know in terms of just being gentle sort of has this connotation about it. So let's dive into what it means to truly be gentle. So in my opinion, the best way to define gentleness is first to consider what gentleness isn't. And gentleness is first and foremost not weakness, right? Being gentle does not mean that one is incapable of being strong. Gentleness is not a form of just lightness and flimsiness. It is 100% an extremely strong and solid energy form. Gentleness is extremely conscious in its manner, right? A very common misconception is that in some fashion, being gentle is weakness or a sign of inferiority, but that is absolutely not the case. Within each and every one of us exists both the extremes of the shadow and the light. Within each and every one of us exists both the constructs or the archetypes of that of hatred, for instance, that of Adolf Hitler, and then also on the other side, to me, the side of goodness and holiness and truth, which is really an embodiment of Jesus Christ. So within both of us, these constructs of Christhood and the constructs of Hitler, they do exist at some level within us all. And to acknowledge that both of these exist is to accept wholeness and to recognize that both dark and light exist within all of us. And it is not to shun away from one or to accept another. It is, we can only truly go into the light as far as we have accepted our shadow and gone into our shadow and done the work and seen the damage that we are capable of doing. And this is something that Jordan Peterson talks about quite a bit, which is that a man should be dangerous. And what I mean by the word dangerous is not necessarily that a man should be an individual who's out there running around with a knife or a gun, shooting up stores. Like, that is not a form of danger that I'm speaking about here. Yes, that's a dangerous situation, but what I'm talking about here is a man who is actually capable of performing or capable of inflicting violence or an even better way to put this, is a man who sees the violence that he is capable of inflicting and the hatred inside of himself, yet he chooses to act with gentleness. He chooses to act with compassion and kindness and intention with what he does, as opposed to unconsciously running around and using his unintegrated behaviors in very unconscious ways. And gentleness, it really does come down to it is a form of deep consciousness within an individual. And to me, what I feel about masculinity as an energy form is consciousness. And masculinity is being conscious and being present to the moment. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that femininity is not present to the moment as well. I actually think that they go about that in two different ways. And basically, femininity is the expression, the openness to the present moment, whereas masculinity approaches the present moment through a sense of security and a deep sense of presence. I think another important story to discuss about the violence and hatred that we are capable of doing is that anger is an energy form that exists within all of us. And I currently in my life right now am beginning to discover and to uncover a lot of repressed anger that I have due to some experiences that I have had as a child. And these were some traumatic experiences that I actually repressed from my life. And within them, there exists a lot of anger and hatred that I've actually been unconscious to. And for whatever reason in my psyche, I believed that in quote, I grew up as a quote unquote nice guy, as Donald Glover would put it, but I always pictured myself as not being an angry individual, kind of holding that construct of I'm just not an angry guy. But what that really is a protection mechanism. It is denial from the fact of this entire part of who I am. It is the shadow of being angry. Somebody or some time in my experience, I took the belief that being angry was wrong or bad. And obviously, if you are using your anger to inflict suffering on others, of course, that is not an okay way. But there is the energy of anger that exists inside of us, and learning how to channel that in healthy ways, whether that's through exercise or extreme heavy lifting, or going to specific ceremonies where there is the intention of releasing anger through primal screaming or through some sort of wrestling or fighting, right? There's ways to channel this anger, this deep rooted emotional energy inside of us that actually it is a part of who we are. And there are aspects of anger that do actually fuel us, and to push that away is to deny an aspect of who you are. To separate that from who you are is a way to remove yourself from wholeness. And in wholeness, there is the acceptance of all that you are, and there is the acceptance of those dark sides of yourself. And if you are trying to step into higher realms of consciousness, or you are trying to step into becoming whole, then you must address these parts of yourself, of the anger, of the sadness, of the hatred that exist inside of you, and to not deny them, but to work with them and to speak with them and to ask them and be with them, and really pondering why are you here? What is the message that you have for me, and how can I learn to essentially to love you, right? So back to the quote, which is that you choose to be a gentleman, right? You do not choose to be a nice guy, to be a mama's boy, to be a pleaser. These are all unconscious patterns that happen to the masculine, to the boy, to the infant, and it is part of the hero's journey of the man today to walk through these realms of people pleasing, and to walk through these realms of being a nice guy, or being quote unquote an asshole, right? And something I love about Donald Glover's work is that he points out that being a nice guy and being an asshole, for whatever reason, we as men assume that that is the only way to get romantic partners attracted to us, is to either be quote unquote super nice and nicer than all the rest, or on the flip side, that For instance, women are only attracted to men who are jerks or men who are assholes. And Donald Glover points out that the opposite of crazy is still crazy. The opposite of being a nice guy, being an asshole, is still a form of craziness. And I think that ultimately what the gentleman archetype is it is something that lies in the middle of the integration of being a nice guy and being an asshole, right? That middle path exists, and that is the path of becoming a gentleman. And essentially what that means is it involves owning who you are. It involves owning that you have needs and that you are an intimate being, and that at your core of who you are vulnerable. You are this There is an aspect of you who is terrified every single day, looking out for death. Our brains are primed. I think it's close to like 80% of what we see is in our reticular activating system is primed to see fear and death. We, through thousands of generations, have been conditioned to look out for dangers. So there is so much fear that exists, and we as men, and this isn't exclusive to men, but we carry around this mask of protection. We carry around the ego, the identity of everything is okay. We answer simple questions. How are you doing today? I'm good. Oh, nice. Glad to hear it. But 90% of the time, you're probably dealing with something deep down inside of you, right? And so we formulate these masks, these identities, because we don't want to let that out. We don't want, for whatever reason, we are afraid of intimacy, to truly let other people see that we are going through something emotional. And I think that there's a variety of reasons for this, and we'll definitely begin diving into these. But first and foremost, one of the biggest reasons is that if we were to have shown vulnerability back in prehistoric times, that would have given the other individual an edge on you. They would have essentially known that they would have killed you, or they could have killed you. If you show vulnerability in that moment, all of a sudden you are susceptible to weakness, right? You are susceptible to being attacked. And that is why it is so scary to be vulnerable, and why today it is so important that if you are to share these aspects of who you are, don't just run around and share it to each and every individual. Make sure that there are people out there who are able to hold space for you and for who you are. And it is so deflating when you walk up to an individual and you release something, you tell them something about yourself or something you're going through, and they're unconscious and they don't know how to hold that space, or they're on their phone, or they're distracted, or they just, they don't really understand what you're going through. And that can feel almost worse than if you were to have kept it in. So it's really important to be intentional about the space that you're going with. Are these individuals out there capable of holding space for you? Are you going to see therapists? Are you going to ceremony or communities where there are individuals out there who understand how to hold space for a vulnerable individual, or for an individual who's expressing their emotions freely? I'm going to just read you a little bit of something I wrote about being a gentleman. Being gentle is a choice. One chooses to be gentle. One does not naively walk into gentleness. When I say that, I think of the Aragorn scene in Lord of the Rings. Like, one does not naively choose to be gentle. You cannot accidentally be gentle. You can accidentally be docile. You can accidentally be weak, a mama's boy, a pleaser, or as Dr. Robert Glover likes to put it, a nice guy. The only possible way to become gentle is to become conscious and present to the moment. Being gentle comes through an accumulation of a lifetime of choosing to be present and to be with the moment and to serve and to love. And one can only make this choice after they have gone into the depths of their own shadow and seen the suffering and the amount of hell that they are capable of creating that exists within the world. Once they are suspended in the state of darkness, they see the suffering that has happened to them and also the suffering they have caused, and with this knowledge they choose to forgive. They choose to forgive others and to forgive themselves. They choose to climb out of this darkness without shying away from love or closing their heart in fear. And with this experiential knowledge of suffering, they choose to be gentle. The gentleman feels the suffering and heartbreak that exists and the trauma and injustices that he has experienced, yet he still chooses to be kind to others, to embody truth, to serve, and to be compassionate. This is what it takes to walk the path of the gentleman. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Christopher Linkenbach, and I am going to be putting out quite a bit of content surrounding masculinity and femininity, because obviously that is the embodiment of the gentleman, to be in touch with both of these aspects of who he is. But I'm going to be creating a lot of this content and just really pushing it out there and just seeing how it resonates. And ultimately, this is something that has come to me for a very long time, and I finally feel as if I am able to speak from a place of truth, and I'm ready to speak about my truth, and I'm willing to accept the criticism and the fear, and I'm willing to become vulnerable about stepping out into my nature. And if you are, if you are an individual out there who's interested in speaking about this with me, I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to have you on the podcast. Please feel free to PM me or DM me. I am always available to talk, and we'll set up a good time, and we'll see if we can make something happen. All right. My name I already said that. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so excited to see where this podcast goes. I'm really doing this as a way to serve and as a way to create content. There is something in my soul that has been longing for something like this, and I finally feel as if the stars align, and I'm ready to do the work to get this message out into the world. So thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.